Sense to do an Ovabore Garage video on my 07 Toyota FJ Cruiser because I'm actually supposed to be selling this thing tomorrow. So yeah, I bought this thing in pretty early, I want to say probably late Q1 or early Q2 of 2018, out in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because the winter of 2017, my house in St. Paul, Minnesota, they don't plow the street, and on several occasions I had snow in excess of 10 inches, and my Fiat 500 electric daily driver at the time had issues with anything over 8 inches because it was a lowered front-wheel drive car with snow tires. So I'm like, okay, I need something with all or four-wheel drive, preferably selectable, and it needs to have a manual transmission. That's a non-negotiable. So I started looking, and the options I found were either vehicles I already had before, like the E53 X5 3.0. I found the first and second gen Porsche Cayenne V6, offered it with a 6-speed, which was pretty interesting. Those actually had my eye, I just didn't find one cheap enough and in enough time. They're also maintenance nightmares. The T1 especially. The T2 is really not too bad. Or wait, sorry, the T1 was not available with a 6-speed. T2 and T3 were. And honestly, neither one of those is super terrible to maintain. The first gen had a lot of weird issues. Third gen was a really awesome car, but still like 18 grand or more. And I wasn't really looking to spend that much on my very occasionally used winter beater. So I settled on the FJ Cruiser because of a few reasons. It was about half the price of a JK Wrangler with a 3.8 liter, and I didn't want the 3.8 because that thing's garbage. The 3.6 Pentastar with a 6-speed would be pretty cool, but this thing is a 4-liter 1GR FE VVTi twin cam V6 engine, 4 liters. It has a, I think it's actually a Toyota built 6-speed manual transmission. It's all-wheel drive with lockable center and rear. And it also has a low range box. I didn't care about any of that stuff, but it was pretty reliable. They look super funky. It actually has 3 windshield wipers, which is one of my favorite qualities of this vehicle. It was a huge selling point for me, and I've always liked how they looked. So anyway, I went shopping for a 6-speed FJ, and I ended up finding the one in Philly at a car dealership, so ended up doing some dickering on price. Flew out, drove it home. A huge ordeal. It shook pretty bad, about 45 miles an hour, and the steering wheel was like 20 degrees cocked to the right when I got it, so luckily we weren't on a tight time schedule. Took it to a Toyota dealership in downtown Philly, which was the only shop in Philadelphia that would do an alignment for me on a Thursday afternoon. Couldn't believe that. And I had them rebalance all the wheels and tires, thinking, oh, that'll totally handle it. That straightened the steering wheel, but it still shook above 64 miles per hour. So not knowing what was going on, we drove home at 64. So we did 1,000 miles on this thing at 64 miles an hour. Got it home, found out that I needed both front half shafts, I needed a front left shock, and both the brake discs had so badly rusted away on the outside perimeter that it was throwing off the wheel balance. So new brake discs. I actually needed a left front caliper as well. Did all the fluids in it, ended up doing a battery, an alternator, needed a fuel tank strap because that was hanging down. Just a lot of little odds and ends. This thing was clearly well cared for a while, and then somebody just stopped caring. So it's got some quirky features like the glove box in front of me on the dash here. It's just so they can make one dash for the airbag cars in the right-hand drive. But it's pretty solid. The fuel economy is pretty bad, but the transmission shift's very car-like, which I like. My old 3rd gen 4Runner was very truckish. You couldn't really hustle the shifter. This thing feels pretty light on its feet, handles really well. I feel like the center of gravity is pretty low. And again, the looks were great. I also think they're really good value for money. I mean, especially if you're in the market, if you don't buy automatics, like I don't. I mean, your options are really limited, and this thing is cheap and reliable. I paid $8.5 for this thing. I'm sure I put 1,500 bucks into it, and I'm actually gonna end up selling it for $8, which is super low. But I had it listed for months, and I only got one person to actually put their money where their mouth was, so I ended up taking that $8,000 offer. Just pay off some of the Fiata, doesn't really matter. But yeah, these things do like 16 miles to the gallon, which is kind of crap too, but very reliable and super retro funky. That's why I bought it though. Well, it just said it was easy to hustle. And yeah, the gear change is still pretty heavy. It's got to be a pretty robust transmission to handle that kind of weight and you know, that kind of clutch engagement. So still a pretty fun car. This does have an aftermarket exhaust on it, which is why you can hear it, but I think it's 250 horsepower and 320 foot-pounds or something like that. So whatever. It is pretty retro funky looking. Yeah, mine's got scratches here and there, but of course it's got the split fold like Mazda RX-8 style rear suicide door. The rear seat's actually pretty spacious on this thing. It's got the old station wagon slash hearse way of opening the rear door. The glass does pop independently, but I don't actually know how to release that, so I've never used it. Yeah, it's a stick axle in the back, independent suspension on the front. That's about it. I mean, it's based on the same platform as the 4Runner, the Lexus GX. That might be about it, but still, it's, like I said, these vehicles are a bargain if you can find one, well, I guess like mine. Yeah, I'll be a little sad to see it go. I mean, it doesn't get any worse just sitting in front of my house on the street because it's a Toyota, but at the same time, it's one more thing to move on snow emergency days. I guess I'll show you guys the 1GR power plant. So I didn't do any mods to this thing, except for the shift knobs. I didn't plan to do any mods to it. It's probably going to be the least interesting garage video I do, but gotta say, for 206,000 miles and you know, people not really giving too much of a hoot about it for the last several years, not a drip of fluid out of it anywhere. The oil analysis came back very positive. So I did have to do that alternator in a parking lot. If you go back and watch my videos from earlier this year, you'll see that happening. I think I took a video on the Polar run when the alternator failed, but yeah. I am going to do the tire changeover. I suppose I have to take them out of the back first. But yeah, this will probably be the last time FJ is in my video series, so say bye-bye. Cool truck, but I think I'm done buying SUVs forever. It's looking pretty good still. And yeah, there's the underside. So 1GR front diff, independent front suspension, 6-speed trans, transfer case, front drive shaft, split exhaust with a merge pipe right there. Then I've got my aftermarket exhaust, fuel tank, rear drive shaft, electronically locking rear diff, which doesn't work. I don't know why, never looked into it. But these are pretty simple ladder frame chassis vehicles, and honestly, this one's in pretty good shape, so I would not have hesitated to keep this thing for a long, long time. But again, under the circumstances of buying things like that Fiat 124 and paying off the solar panels on my house, I think it's just a wise move since I don't actually drive this. But the guy couldn't afford to buy the winter tires as well, so I'm gonna pull these off, put the all seasons back on it, which are still pretty solid, and then sell these on because it is winter. Well, the winties are off. Farewell, little buddy. I mean, these are pretty solid all seasons too, but man, I would never drive a vehicle up here without 2 sets of wheels and tires. Never even bothered taking the Pennsylvania registration off this thing. Farewell, FJ. It's been good.